Well, thank you guys for coming. Really, thanks for coming, taking some time out of your day to listen to my lecture. Today we're going to talk about the Anthropocene as a concept. I know in this class, up until this point, it's come up a few times in relation to climate change or in relation to resource scarcity. This term kind of gets thrown around a lot broadly in environmental studies, and in the sciences and in the social sciences as well. I want to spend some time today talking about it very specifically so you guys have an understanding of it before we move into the second part of this class, which is going to move from environmental problems to environmental interventions. And I think the Anthropocene provides a really interesting kind of conceptual framework for moving ahead with this class and thinking through these issues in practice. So I do want to spend some time talking about that. If we have time, I just want to at least signal that this is in relation to extinction, and that's a big issue with regards to environmental studies as well, as one could imagine. Very quickly, some objectives for this lecture. So what you should be getting out of this by the end of this lecture is, what is the Anthropocene? What counts as being a part of the Anthropocene? And how does this concept, again, fit within this course? What are very specific facets and issues related to the Anthropocene? And then following that, if we have time, a brief discussion of how it relates to the sixth grade extinction, which is currently the extinction that we're dealing with now. So these are, again, what you should be getting out of the class. But first, what is a scene, right? So there's all these different ways of thinking about timelines, and something that gets thrown around a lot is this kind of hyphen scene. And this isn't direct reference to kind of the geologic record. So we have, you can see here, the Pleistocene, the Holocene, the Paleocene, and now we're talking about the Anthropocene. A scene really just represents a new kind of signature in the geologic record, so a new layer, as it were, because you can think of the Earth as being layered, right? You learn this in high school. You have the geologic record, you have the Earth's crust, blah, 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 blah. And so all that to say, these represent different layers. And as we move ahead, right, we get a different kind of signature. So, for example, we talk about the Cretaceous and the Paleocene here. You can kind of see here, it says the big extinction. You can kind of see some ideas of what that might mean, but what do you think that refers to?
Maybe the dinosaurs?
Probably the dinosaurs. I have no idea, and I think it's been something I've tried to figure out. Why they call it the KT boundary when it's actually the CP boundary? Confusing, but that's what that represents. All that to say, a scene represents a new layer in the geologic record. We're currently in the Holocene, technically, but we're moving towards what people consider the Anthropocene. So we're right here now, and people think we're up here. And so just so you have an idea of what that kind of hyphenated meaning is, before we get too far ahead, I'm curious what you guys think the anthro means in Anthropocene.
Human?
It means human, so you can think about anthropology, right? That's the study of humans. And in this case, anthro, according to Jacob, thank you, means humans. So basically the human scene. And so in terms of what that means for the geologic record, it means that there's a signature represented in the geologic record by humanity, that there's been so much activity because of our population, because of our species, that you can actually see it in the geologic record. However, there's been a lot of other names, and this is important to think about in terms of the way this concept gets used by others, in terms of the fact that not everyone caused what we could call Anthropocene. So maybe there's human signatures, but specific people or specific populations created those signatures. So just a quick run through of other names. You have the Capitalocene, that kind of refers to the economic order that you have created it. The Plantationocene is a bit more complex, but that refers to basically, when you think of colonialism, which we talk about in this class as well, the kind of frameworks and concepts they use and how that translates, again, into the Earth's geologic record. The Cthulhucene is a more goofy concept created by kind of new and contemporary social theorists that think about animals and more than human life. And all that to say, there's several names, so I have the etc. scene here to kind of flag that. There's no given or secure or, satisfactory name that people have come up with just yet. It's all broadly considered the Anthropocene, however. Another kind of question is, when did it start? So did it start 8,000 years ago when we started to farm agriculturally? Did it start when we detonated the atomic bomb? Did it start in the Industrial Revolution? There's all kinds of timelines and different starting points for it. And a lot of people are still concerned or wondering about if we're currently entering it or did we already enter it. So again, these timelines are helpful for having this discussion about what is meaningful about the Anthropocene, and that's ultimately why I wanted to bring it up now as opposed to the beginning of the course, because I think it is a useful concept, right? So there's all these kind of questions about it, but ultimately, the Anthropocene flags a moment in our species history that we can think geologically. So rather than individual populations on individual continents, we have a problem or a concept that forces us to think globally, forces us to think geologically. And I think it's useful for dealing with contemporary environmental issues. So really quickly, there are various characteristics of what represents this Anthropocene. And these are pretty complex, and certainly we can cover this more in the discussion section. But trace records of human activity being one of the main ones, and that's kind of the more intuitive one. When I talk about a signature in the geologic record, right? People are talking about layers of plastics. You can find what they call black carbon in the Arctic and the Antarctic. You'll see black ice, and that refers to smoke or whatever that comes from cities, and it settles in the Arctic. Nuclear radiation. So again, I mentioned the atomic bomb previously. Particles from that are actually registered in the geologic record, and it's made it's a planetary issue at this point. The second one here is a bit more complicated, but the use or depletion of fossil fuels. So as far as we know, we're the first species to really use fossil fuels, and so we take from the geologic record, put in the atmosphere, and that creates a signature chemically in the atmosphere that you can also read through the carbon cycle. This one's really interesting to me. So there's all kinds of new materials and elements that have come up. Aluminum, we didn't really know about that element until not that long ago. Concrete, polymers, plastics, these things are made from other elements that are already here, but the way we're combining them and then reinserting them back into the record through landfills, for example, is creating new elements that weren't previously there. And that obviously relates to geologic changes, so you see kind of these geologic impacts that are much less clear on a kind of day-to-day basis, but over time you can speculate that you would see these changes. Perhaps two of the biggest kind of signals of the Anthropocene is global warming and climate change and mass extinctions. And so I'll spend a little bit of time on global warming really quickly. We've talked a lot about that in this class already. Do you guys remember what I might have said about that that would be related to the Anthropocene?
About the carbon in the atmosphere?
Carbon atmosphere.
Extreme weather.
Extreme weather, this is true. So extreme weather isn't necessarily indicative of the Anthropocene per se, but a lot of people write about it as being related to it. And I guess all that to say, various aspects of climate change that we are experiencing, such as the rapidity of climate change, right? So it has been hotter here on Earth, it has been colder here on Earth, but the rate that it's changing, that's what's unique about the Anthropocene, right? So the way climate is changing in the Anthropocene, that's unique. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on this because we did talk about it. However, I do want to talk a bit about mass extinctions. And so if you think back to that kind of cartoonish graph I had, clearly I mentioned the dinosaurs. Maybe you noticed it, maybe you didn't, but below, and I can go back to it here really quickly, you'll see this one called gigantic extinction. And this one only really flags 2 of the apparent 5 extinction events we've already had. But basically, it doesn't always happen, but when you see in the geologic record a new epoch, it's oftentimes associated with a mass extinction event. And so, again, that's evidence here by gigantic extinction, big extinction, right? This is kind of cartoonish, but you get the idea. And so one way to know if we are experiencing a new geologic epoch is to understand it, to see if we're having an extinction event. And so again, many people have said or thought that we are in one currently. The podcast I circulated to you all to hear ahead of time does a really good job of explaining why we think that and the fact that they think humans are responsible for that. And so again, that ties directly back to the Anthropocene. Any questions so far? I'm moving kind of fast. You good? We're good? Okay. So really quickly, again, I wanted to at least signal extinction events. See if this wants to work for me. So when we think about extinction events, we've already talked about this a couple of times, but what's everyone's favorite extinction? What's the one that everyone knows about?
Dinosaurs.
The dinosaurs. Well, I should back up a bit. I forgot to talk about this. So in a nutshell, again, how do we know we're in an extinction? Sorry about this. How do we know we're in an extinction? A lot of people, again, I mentioned plastics, but you can see in these pictures, this is actually a study from Hawaii. Plastics actually combining with rock. If you think of basically how rocks are made through, over time, pressed together, pressure, we have new types of rocks being developed. And again, this is a study from Hawaii. And that's one maybe easier way to understand it, but again, if we think about this, so this is data points from the Fukushima meltdown, and so this is all basically points, it's kind of cut off up here, but since 2011, since when it happened, you can see how it's moved through the global ocean circulation. And at this point, you can see that the whole Pacific's been touched by that radiation. And if you know anything about global ocean circulation, if it's that bad, you can assume that it's gotten everywhere, at least to some extent. And so again, these are different ways to think about visualizing or seeing the Anthropocene. But again, a big way is to consider extinction. So we're back to extinctions. Everyone's favorite extinction, dinosaurs. What actually happened, right? So there's this theory that a comet hit the planet. And is that, at least in your mind, is that what killed the dinosaurs?
Mm-hmm.
That's what, okay, right. A lot of people would think that. It's interesting, actually, because the comet, I'm sure, was catastrophic in its own right, but what it did was create a feedback loop ecologically. And so over still hundreds of thousands of years, the dinosaurs died off. So it wasn't like it was instantaneous. But that comet certainly hit the Earth, and we know that because you can see it in the geologic record. And so when we talk about the TK boundary, you can see it. And so comets have an element called iridium, which is only found on other planets or comets or asteroids. It's not something that's common on Earth. And so you can see, this is a really basic chart here, but you can see that before the comet hit, it was still present because, we've had comets hit the Earth before, like it's a part of the geologic record. But you can see this spike, and that represents, a new layer. It's an entirely new signature. And that's how we move from the Cretaceous to the Tertiary epoch. And so this picture is kind of big, so it takes a second to load. But you can see here, this is a kind of just picture of that layer. So this is the Cretaceous, this is the Tertiary, this is that iridium spike, and this is again a planetary record. So theoretically, you could go see this at any rock formation. But again, this is a very visual way to understand a change in the geologic record. And so again, when we're thinking about the Anthropocene, what we're doing as a species looks like this, right? And does it map onto extinction? And that's a different way to think about this. Really quickly, I think we're going to run out of time, but I want to at least show you guys some different ways to think about extinction, and then we'll pick up with this next time. So I had you guys listen to Elizabeth Colbert's podcast on the 6th grade extinction. She wrote the book. It's a best-selling book. And so that gives you some sense of how we're implicated in it, how we caused it, if we caused it. But then there's been other people who have written about how geologic eras in some sense are even nested catastrophes. So for this epoch, this Anthropocene to take place, we have to consider that there's been many different scenes taking place. And it's just a different way to think about it. And again, different ways to think, especially as we move towards our final projects, different ways to think about these concepts. Basically, ultimately, the idea that I'm getting at here is that because the time scale distinction is so complicated, it's invisible, right? We can hardly see it, and that we are the asteroid. And so again, this very clearly highlights that if indeed we are in the Anthropocene and we are responsible for the Great Extinction, this is a different way to think about that. It should be noted, I suppose, before I let you guys go, that we are technically not in the 6th grade extinction, so there's a certain threshold that you have to pass to get there, and we're not technically there just yet. It's really bad, but it's not extinction bad yet. However, we're certainly on record to get there. So I guess with that, I'll end a little early, just so I can make sure that you guys have time to ask questions. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you next week. Thank you. All right, I don't know how to turn this off.
Yeah.